Hey everybody, Mike Harrelson here with Article 2 Industries, again with Mike Ricker. Thanks for sticking around for part 3 of this interview. We're going to talk about guns and shooting and fun stuff like that we love to do.
Excellent.
All right, so we talked about in part 1, when we looked in your bio, you have an extensive history as a shooter and an instructor in law enforcement and military, but what we didn't touch on, as opposed to a lot of cops who don't get as much trigger time as they should or could, and as we know, a lot of cops don't really participate in shooting sports as much as we could and should. You're a rare case. In 1995, you took an unlimited class in USPSA all the way, and you won the Texas State Championship.
Well, in unlimited, yes. And shooting has always been a passion of mine. Instructing has always been a passion of mine. The ability to shoot is one thing. The ability to instruct is another. I believe one fits well with the other, but one is not exclusive from the other. You don't have to be a great shot to be a great instructor. It helps, don't get me wrong, because the transition of feeling and the way to relay that to a student helps. But you and I have discussed in great length about instructors, and especially nowadays, you see them by the page in the yellow book that may or may not have bona fide credentials. Just because someone can shoot doesn't mean they're a good instructor, in my opinion.
Absolutely. So when you look at the guys out there who are not just rising stars but big stars, so if you look at a guy, and there's a lot of guys on YouTube, for instance, they have a lot of shooting tips and tricks. But when you look at a Costa, Haley, DeFore, Proctor, Fisher, some of the really gifted instructors, even if they couldn't shoot, they're gifted communicators. So tell me, to your point, when you communicate with a civilian you're training versus a law enforcement officer or a military member for that matter, how different is that?
Well, look, people learn differently. Everybody learns a little bit differently, even people in the same profession. Some people are visual learners. Some people are they hear instructions well. Sorry, I've lost the words. Some people feel, they're tactical learners, and you have to be able to speak to any one of those. But a lot of times, the litmus test for an instructor is their way to communicate, just like you had mentioned. Whenever you're talking to a civilian, as opposed to a law enforcement officer, as opposed to a military person, each one has their own verbiage. What the individual needs to understand is their roles and responsibilities post-shooting. They have the right to remain silent. They need to exercise their right to remain silent. They need to contact their attorneys. They need to have an attorney prepared. They need to have an individual that will mentor them through the process. And a lot of times, I and instructors that came through my generation will provide that. The good thing about having a law enforcement officer as an instructor, say in this position, we're very well versed with those particular aspects of shooting. Anytime we're involved in a shooting, there's a post-shooting investigation, post-incident investigation. And a lot of times there's judicial processes afterwards. So we're familiar with that, and we can give that to our instructor, our students, if you will. Absolutely.
So it's a great point. As a law enforcement officer, when you're involved in a shooting, you get a couple weeks on the beach while there's an internal investigation completed, right? When you're a civilian out there, you're involved in a shooting or a shootout. In this situation, you still have life responsibilities. You don't get 2 weeks on the beach.
No. You still have to go to work. You still have to deal with your family. You still have to deal with the trauma. Yeah, if you haven't been arrested, you're certainly there's going to be grand jury processes involved. There's going to be things involved that you are probably very unfamiliar with. And unfortunately, there will be people that prey upon you at this time to offer you legal services. If your firearms instructor is not capable of providing you with some type of guidance as to what you should be doing or who you should be looking for as far as professional assistance, then they are doing you a disservice. And they are not firearms instructors, they're more of administrators. Mm-hmm. And I've always held the position that I am more of a mentor and a coach as opposed to an administrator when it comes to firearms instruction.
So, regarding altercations, I'm actually very happy to hear there's a growing acceptance, it seems like, in the Second Amendment and firearms community, concealed carry community, that you can't solve all problems with a gun.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you
Absolutely.
see more guys, you know, everybody you see a click, they have a knife hanging out of their pocket, but starting to see a few more things like people carrying pepper spray.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
People actually considering escalation of force rather than just go to a gun.
And that's a time that's well past due. And I agree with
Okay.
you. I think that's awesome that we're doing that.
Some of the states that are not free states, you can't carry OC. If you're carrying OC as a force option, you are a criminal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How do we go from hands? We don't want to go hands-on with a criminal, right? Cops rush into the trouble to solve the trouble. Civilians, we want to remove ourselves if possible.
We're
right?
paid and trained to do just exactly that, to
Okay.
go to the trouble. Civilians are not.
So if you live in a state like California, New York, one of these states now, where you may not have those force options, what is recommended between bare hands and a gun?
Well, there's a lot of different things. And allow me to answer your question indirectly, please. Knowing what you're walking into, knowing how to recognize certain areas of threat. We have to recognize the fact that we're in an environment nowadays that is unlike what we had in the 50s, where everybody could just walk down the sidewalk and not have to worry about looking for somebody with an axe or a kukri that's going to cut off our heads. We have to be cognizant of the potential threat. Situational awareness is paramount in our lives today. We see a bundle along the side of the road that's unattended. This owing to the military side of the house. Soldiers see that, immediately they cue that could be something dangerous. It's probably somebody's laundry, it's probably somebody's groceries, but it could also be an undetonated device. A man wearing a long trench coat on a warm day. You and I as law enforcers, we immediately think bank robbery, there's automatically something suspicious in our mind.
Active shooters.
Active shooter, exactly. Civilians need to start recognizing that. And the best tool that we all carry is the cell phone. Get 911, start people rolling your direction. It's all about mass, it's all about numbers, it's all about making people aware. If you have to, there is no cowardness involved in retreating from the situation. If possible, if it were me, I would monitor from afar, make sure I keep my eyes on the individual, call law enforcement, let them come and find out. That's their job. I do not have to rush in there with guns out or with my hands out and expose myself and possibly prematurely make this guy act in a way that he shouldn't act in the first place. I would certainly never advocate taking up, say, arms like a knife or an edged weapon, especially if you're not educated in how to use them against an armed assailant. You'll probably wind up getting shot and killed. But with proper training, an edged weapon is an extremely effective device. More than that, when confronted at close quarters, proper techniques to remove the gun from the assailant has been utilized several times. I've used it myself personally. I know other officers have used it. It's extremely effective. Knowing how to execute these things, and not in a martial arts black belt setting, but in a real world sense where men and women can talk to each other and practice on each other and get the job done correctly, it can be an extremely effective tool.
Clearly, at times, you can bring a knife to a gunfight.
Clearly, at times, you can. I have taken my bare hands into a gunfight, not knowing I was walking into a gunfight.
Not by choice.
Exactly, not by choice, and then wound up with a gun.
Sure.
And an arrest. But again, you and I are trained in that. And these are things that we can offer people.
So regarding personal responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
people are going to listen to this and say, Mike Ricker, this is ridiculous. You're talking about unattended jackets and packages on the street that could be undetonated IEDs. The participants in the Boston Marathon a couple of years ago didn't think anything of those backpacks, did they?
No, evidently not. Nobody was evidently notified.
What can we do to just raise or inspire a little bit more personal awareness and personal responsibility that, yeah, it can happen to you. And you don't just have to live in New York City for it to happen to you.
Well, Mike, and I'm glad you said that, because let's look at the ones that hit closest to home for me. They're both Oklahoma City, or in Oklahoma. For crying out loud, you can't get any more homebred than Oklahoma. This isn't New York City where there's a billion people crammed into a couple square miles. This is Oklahoma, where people still leave their doors open at night, and there's terrorist attacks there. We have to be able, as a nation, to raise our level of awareness to certain threat cues. These cues, you can see them on the street, again, what we've talked about, discarded bundles, people that are out of place, wearing out of place clothing in certain environments, people that are active furtively meaning in an uncharacteristic manner, maybe reaching into things that normally you wouldn't, consistently reaching into a coat pocket as if to turn something on or turn something off.
Looking squirrely.
Looking squirrely, shifting their weight, shifting undergarments. You never know if it's a bomb vest. Things of this nature. These are things that we have to just become more aware of. I don't want anyone to be paranoid. That would make the terrorist a winner. What I want people to be is more aware, Mike. That's all I'm after. And if we can provide them with some information that might assist them in becoming more aware, I think we're doing our job as instructors, as mentors, and as fellow citizens.
Love it. Not fear, not paranoia.
Nope.
Preparation.
Preparation, and a book of reactions that we can use should the event unfold.
Preparation brings confidence.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Don't fear, respect.
Excellent. Well, stay tuned in future segments. We're going to pick Mike's brain a little bit about handling a firearm and where to start. Especially, Mike, I'm looking forward to hearing we have a growing segment of new shooters, particularly women shooters. So we want to talk about what kinds of guns that new shooters should choose and what kind of training they should look for to get proficient with that.
Excellent.